in the article, you look at how segments of the left have really become pretty critical of AOC over the last couple of years, right? And in your piece, you explain that there's been sort of a series of mini controversies, I guess I'll call them, starting with the force the vote controversy. You talk about AOC and Jamal Bowman's votes on funding Israel's Iron Dome, which of course generated quite a lot of backlash. And you did not get into the Met Gala tax the rich dress fiasco, but I personally would add that to, again, just a string of sort of flashpoints that have outraged a lot of people on the left. So without, making you relitigate every single one of these mini controversies, I'm curious, what do you think these fights tell us about AOC's relationship to the left, and then more broadly, the left's relationship to power?
Sure. Well, I think more than anything, these incidents perhaps reveal a real tension about
Yeah.
what it means for leftists to govern and how leftists are able to use their power through their considerable number of elected officials, all things considered, after just a couple of years. So the incidents I really focused on were Force the Vote and the fracas over Jamal Bowman's whether or not he should be expelled from DSA because of his vote for Iron Dome. And I think that what both of these situations illustrated was the fact that there is at times a tension between being, basically a tribune for the left and, fighting at all times for a leftist agenda and, governing in a remotely conventional way and using the levers of power as they are meant to be used. And I think that both of those situations really brought to the foreground attention within the broader left about what those electeds are for.
Yeah, so I want to follow up on that because part of your article also looks at how it's kind of a double-edged sword for AOC that she's sort of been catapulted to mega stardom, right? She is like household name at this point, very polarizing, attracts obviously a lot of ire from Fox News commentators and other figures on the right, but at the same time is also like beloved and like broadly sort of held up by not just leftists and progressives, but I think even some liberals at this point. And to that point, I want to share the cover of a new book that I saw is just out from New York Magazine. It's called "Take Up Space: The Unprecedented AOC." I think the book just came out this week. I happened to glimpse it. I of course haven't read the book, but just from skimming through the description, it looks like a pretty hagiographic account of kind of her rise to stardom. So, given this kind of push and pull, or just given this, extremely high profile, how do you think this mega stardom works for and against AOC right now?
Okay, well, the analogy I used in the piece came from one of my sources, which is riding the tiger. I think one big part of this story, the story was more about the squad and the new elected officials, but I think the story is very obviously also about Bernie, insofar
Mm,
as sometimes on the left we back up and remember that the biggest single reason that we have gotten to the point that we have at this point when we did it is because Bernie Sanders decided to run for the presidency on a lark in 2016.
right.
So since that happened, we have elected several people, and that's a big deal. That's important. More people understand what socialism is than ever before. DSA has cleared 100,000 members, etc. And AOC is a fairly significant part of that. I think the other squad members are also a significant part, but no one is quite at that same level that AOC is. And so, she is able to be a mouthpiece. She is able to be, more palatable to liberals than I
Mhm.
think some leftist messaging has been. And I think that's ultimately a good thing. We do want people to be exposed to these arguments. We want people to, be reached where they are. And so I think that those things are very, very good. AOC and the rest of the squad have given DSA so much visibility, and they've really helped drive our membership and bring more people into the org who become organizers, who get involved in other campaigns. I think the downside is that they have these broad platforms. They have these very broad constituencies. They are trying to make political inroads within, whatever context they are operating in. In some cases, they are trying not to butt heads with the leadership, trying to figure out how to navigate the halls of power, even if they're doing that in very good faith from a leftist perspective. I think that it can be hard to be a confrontational outsider when you're on the inside. And I think it can be hard to learn how to be a movement politician in general. And I think that all of those tensions are obvious within a few different people.
Yeah. I want to follow up on that because something else that you point out in your piece is sort of near the end. You note that the problem isn't really that AOC is insufficiently accountable to the left, or maybe that's kind of part of the problem, but a larger problem is that in the US there really is no left to speak of, or it's in a very weakened state, right? So I suppose the question for you is, do you feel like then these controversies over, what AOC or what certain squad members did or did not do, do you see these as distractions, or do you think that there is still some value in continuing to make noise about these issues?
I wouldn't call them distractions, because I think that, especially in the Jamal Bowman case, I think that the controversy was over something very serious. He did place, I think, a pretty unconscionable vote. I have no defensive words to say about that vote.
Right.
That he certainly deserved criticism for that. I do think that sometimes the ire over these particular issues, and certainly I think the desire to cast these people off and say that they're complete sellouts because these things happen, that was more of a force the vote thing. I do think that that's based on a faulty analysis of power. Ultimately, the left is pretty weak. We are in a very early phase of what I hope is a very generalized resurgence of power, knock on wood. But yeah, I mean, like I said, I think that we have to think of 2016 as year zero in some and, looking around at year 6, we certainly have some wins, and that's good. That's heartening. But I don't think that we can delude ourselves into believing that the left is more powerful than it is. And yeah, right now we only have a few electeds, and we only represent a relatively small swath of their base. So having a stronger left, having more elected officials, that changes the calculus in terms of the political leverage that we are able to exercise, the way that they are able to exercise leverage with their fellow electeds. I don't think that means making excuses for people or never criticizing them, but I do think that it's going to be a fool's errand to focus on making sure that individual elected officials with relatively low amounts of power within Congress are acting in perfect lockstep with every single thing that we've voted on at convention at any given moment. I don't think that that's a way to get stronger. I think that that's a way to, have more disciplined messaging within a very, very small group of people. But that's not going to be what actually tips the balance of class power in the United States.
So on that note, I want to end with a quote that I really liked from your article. So you write, "The optimism that the squad could be an alternative path forward to Bernie-style universalism was based on an assumption that so far has not turned out to be true." And actually, in your earlier comments, you were sort of alluding to this. And I bring this up because just anecdotally, when AOC was elected, I was working at like a New York liberal think tank, and I worked with a lot of people who just hated Bernie, like could not stand him. Like they were of that wing of the Democratic Party where they're like, I just like cannot stand Bernie Sanders and I don't want to hear anything that he has to say. Weirdly, all of these people loved AOC, and that like kind of blew my mind for a little bit. Like I was like, I don't really understand. Like this person campaigned for Bernie, she has endorsed him. How can you like AOC but not Bernie? But as you were sort of alluding to earlier, the Venn diagram of people who like AOC and the Venn diagram of people who like Bernie there's obviously substantial overlap, but it's it's not a perfect circle. And there is kind of like a sliver of people who, as you were saying, maybe were brought into sort of more left-leaning politics because of AOC. But I really liked this line from your article because I mean I agree. Like I guess I'm still unsure like what dividends that has really yielded. So can you talk a little bit about just that line and kind of how you chose to wrap up that article?
Yeah, I think that what you're saying about the liberal think tank was exactly what I was thinking.
Yeah.
That around 2016 through 2018, it was considered pretty conventional wisdom that one of the reasons that Bernie didn't win is because he wasn't good enough on identity politics. He wasn't good enough on social issues, and he couldn't reach the most significant parts of the Democratic base. I think that 2020 proved that, of course he could. But more importantly, I think that, I've come to believe over the years, we have had some great successes. See, Rashida Tlaib, et cetera, have certainly been able to run very powerful campaigns in liberal areas. But what no one so far has been able to demonstrate is that crossover appeal in purple or even red districts that Bernie Sanders had. And, unfortunately, the presidential election didn't play out in exactly the same way in 2020 as it did in 2016. But to this day, he still has a different profile of favorability than the rest of the squad does. The rest of the squad's favorability ratings look very much like a typical Democrat's favorability ratings. And that's not to say that they're typical Democrats, because I don't think they are. I don't think that that's fair. But Bernie is able to capture audiences and gain supporters that the rest of the squad hadn't, and that's what we have to figure out how to tap into, how to run leftists in areas that aren't already occupied by Democrats. Until we can do that, I think that the left will be subject to the same demographic collapse of education polarization in the cities that it seems like the Democrats are headed to now.
Yeah. All right. Well, Natalie, thank you so much for your time. I want to shout out your article again. It's in the latest print issue of Jacobin, and it's called The End of the AOC Honeymoon. I believe it's also up on the web as well. Thank you so much, Natalie.
Thank you so much for having me.
If you like this video from The Jacobin Show, please hit like and subscribe and share with your friends. Thanks.